everybody, it's Annabelle and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to be looking at some of my favourite foliage or feature orchids that I keep not only for their flowers but for their beautiful kind of shape, structure, leaves or leaf pattern. There's a mixture of all of the above in here, so I wanted to take you through some of the orchids that I always find myself going and checking on in the grow room, regardless of whether they're in flower or not, just because I really enjoy their appearance. I was requested to make this video by one of my subscribers. I'm sorry that it's taken me a while to get round to it, but I hope that you'll enjoy this kind of brief tour of some of the orchids that I've pulled down that I really enjoy the structure, shape, colour or pattern of the leaves of. So this isn't going to be restricted to jewel orchids. I think that there are some in here that you'll find surprising. I've really tried to keep this at available, attainable orchids. None of these in here are particularly rare. In fact, none of them in here are rare at all in this region, Europe. Some of them may be harder to find in different regions. Usually if you go online, type in Google and look up orchid nurseries, you will be able to find at least one of these, I am certain, in your area. So I can't necessarily recommend nurseries that are outside of my region, but it's super easy to find using Google. I quite like to use Google image search because that comes up with products rather than just lists, and you can see the orchids for sale. Anyway, let's get into it with the first group of orchids. The first group of orchids that I wanted to show you guys was the mottled leaf or leaf pattern variations of orchids. So these are split into kind of two groups for the orchids that I have. I have the Phalaenopsis and I also have some mottled leaf Paphiopedilums. These are both beautiful, beautiful orchids to have in your collection with stunning leaves, and I think that the Phalaenopsis side of this is vastly underestimated actually. People think of Phalaenopsis, they don't always think of foliage plants, but actually you can have some really, really stunning foliage textures and colours in this group of orchids. They're incredibly beautiful and they require similar kind of care to normal Phalaenopsis. Here we have a Phalaenopsis celebensis, which is the exception to this. It does like to be kept a little bit drier, and I have this in a pot with lots of ventilation to allow lots of oxygenation. I never let it fully dry out, but it has huge amounts of aeration around the roots, but it doesn't particularly like to be kept in a kind of stale environment with soggy medium and little aeration. The other Phalaenopsis, the complex hybrid that I've got here, which you can often find in garden centres in this particular area, it's slightly fragrant but tends to produce terminal spikes, so not probably the best type of hybrid foliage Phalaenopsis, but commonly and widely available. I picked this one up in IKEA actually, and it produced a terminal spike, but then it produced a keiki, and keiki has produced a non-terminal spike, but all of the others in IKEA had terminal spikes, so it's just genetically prone to it, unfortunately. Show you the flower there. The very famous Phalaenopsis schilleriana, which is currently spiking. It's this time of year that it spikes. You can get quite a lot of diversity in the leaf patternings on schilleriana, and schilleriana is an extremely easy to care for, versatile Phalaenopsis with beautiful sprays of pink flowers with a really interesting lip and a wonderful rosy fragrance. So I would thoroughly recommend the Phalaenopsis schilleriana if you're interested in getting a species mottled leaf Phalaenopsis. It'll only flower once a year, but you get wonderful displays of fragrant flowers and a beautiful, beautiful foliage to go with it. If you enjoy a slightly more of a challenge, Phalaenopsis celebensis is just stunning. It's probably the most attractive Phalaenopsis leaf pattern that I own. You can get schillerianas with a similar type of foliage though. There aren't many widely available in my region, but look at this new leaf, like that's just stunning, absolutely beautiful. For another very easy to care for foliage Phalaenopsis, the Phalaenopsis or Doretus pulcherrima variety marmorota is a subspecies of the Phalaenopsis pulcherrima, which is very easy to care for. It's actually terrestrial in many regions, so it's just very easy to care for in my experience. It has absolutely gorgeous leaves on a more miniature orchid, so it's going to remain very compact compared to the Phalaenopsis schilleriana, which can get very long leaves. In the other side of this, we have the Paphiopedilums with mottled leaves. I'm just going to take you a bit closer to really appreciate some of this foliage. So this is Paphiopedilum malapoens. This is an absolutely beautiful Paphiopedilum that I got as a seedling. It's supposed to be a little bit trickier and a little bit slower growing, but I just find it absolutely beautiful. It has a beautiful lace patterning on the leaves that is just stunning. I don't know if you can see the texture, but it has almost like a snakeskin type of velvety texture to the leaves that is just beautiful. Just going to pop some additional lighting on it so that you can really see that shine and that texture that these leaves have. They are absolutely beautiful, like lace. Really, really stunning. If you're after a slightly easier Paphiopedilum, the Paphiopedilum delinati also has extremely fragrant flowers. They smell like soft raspberry yogurt, and it has beautiful foliage to match. Let me just get you in closer on this one. Just absolutely beautiful. Again, very lace-like patterning to the leaves. I'm just going to put the light on. You can see that it doesn't quite have the same sheen that the malapoens has, but there is a very slight sheen, particularly noticeable on the darker areas of the foliage as they rotate them. Exceptionally beautiful and very easy to care for and fast growing Paphiopedilum. All of the orchids that I'm discussing here are grown intermediate to warm in inorganic medium in various wicking systems like semi-hydro or self-watering, that sort of thing. But there are lots and lots of ways you can grow these orchids. There is not just one way to grow them, and they're just very easy to grow in my experience, so they'll be very versatile and adapt very readily to your potting medium of choice, what works for you in your environment, in your area. As long as they're kept in similar kind of temperature conditions to what I keep them, I believe you won't have any issues at all with these orchids. And intermediate to warm to me is sort of 18 to 24 degrees Celsius. At that, most of these will be absolutely perfect. I'll put that up in Fahrenheit on screen. Some of them might appreciate a little bit warmer, but I'll get to those in a bit, and they're going to be the larger size orchids as well. So maybe not so suited to all living conditions. So those are my kind of mottle-leaved orchids, which I honestly think can be stunning additions to any collection. And these are all very compact, so you won't really have issues with space for these. They'll grow kind of in clumps quite often. The Schilleriana being the exception to this, you might get some longer leaves on that, but no more than a typical complex hybrid Phalaenopsis, honestly, because many of them use Schilleriana in the parentage, but they lose that leaf mottling and the fragrance. So in this case, I think species is a little bit better for the foliage phals, shall we say. The next orchid that I'm going to show you is the Phalaenopsis Schilleriana crossed with Manai Black, or Phalaenopsis Schillman, and this produces a really beautiful flowered orchid. This is also known sometimes as the Phalaenopsis Bronze Maiden. I wanted to show you this on their own because I just find them to be absolutely beautiful, and mine are actually slightly different to some of the others that you can see. There is some variation in this hybrid. They have wonderful light silvery coloured leaves with a little bit of speckling on them, and I just find them to be extremely beautiful as foliage orchids. And the flowers on them are also gorgeous. So I think the Phalaenopsis Schillman or Bronze Maiden, or however it's called when you find it, or if it's just called by the hybrid name, is an absolutely gorgeous addition to anybody's collection if you're interested in orchids with beautiful foliage. And in some lights this almost appears kind of silvery blue, and the freckles on it are just adorable. The next orchid with absolutely stunning white-edged variegated foliage that I'm going to show you is the Arachnis Maggie. This is an absolutely beautiful Vandaceous type. Arachnis in general are quite fast growing and can be giant-sized vining orchids, but the Maggie is actually quite a compact Arachnis and very easy to care for and easy to grow potted in my climate, in my environment. It likes warmer temperatures and quite high light. and it has this beautiful white variegation on the leaves that I think is absolutely beautiful. I believe that this variegation isn't inherited genetically, and that most of the orchids that you see from the Maggie variegated kind of cultivar are in fact usually cuttings, and I received this as a keiki from a top cutting, but there was damage in the crown of the top cutting, and in the space of a year it's grown into a full-size plant for me. So I really can't complain at the speed and vigour of growth for this orchid. And my favourite type of variegation on plants is the white variegation rather than the yellow variegation. So I find that Maggie here has absolutely stunning variegation. I just love it. I am a little unsure as to the availability of the Maggie variegated Arachnus hybrid cultivar clone in different regions, because in Europe it is widely available at specific times from nurseries. I believe this is to do with the fact that most of them are cutting propagations, and so there is obviously a time of year when all of those cuttings are going to be taken and rooted, or keikis that are pulled off the mother plants. But I'm not sure about the availability in other regions, so I do apologise if this isn't available in your region and I'm just giving you eye candy, but it is beautiful eye candy, wouldn't you agree? So that is the Arachnus Maggie, beautiful variegated Vandaceous type. I felt that I had to show you the Rhynchostylis giganteas in this because they are one of my favourite foliage orchids. And there's nothing particularly initially striking about the foliage, but to me the sheer scale of the foliage, the width of the beautiful leaves, the striping of the leaves, and the kind of succulent nature just makes them one of my favourite orchids to grow, and I think they're absolutely beautiful, and I really think that you can't underestimate them as foliage plants because they're just stunning. Really, they are. They are compact growing Vandaceous types compared to some Vandas, but they will grow quite big, as you can see here, and they will get a lot bigger than this. However, they are not as fast growing as many Vandas, so this will take a bit longer in the home. And I have about 5 of these in various colour forms. I've got the red, the spots, the cartoon, and 2 orange. One is a seedling and one's actually just spiking now. These are all spiking now. They spike in the autumn, winter, in line with falls as there is like an overall temperature drop. I just think they're beautiful. So that is the Rhynchostylis gigantea, and I really, really recommend it to anyone looking for a Vandaceous type that they can want to be able to grow potted if they've got warmer conditions. And these guys like a lot of moisture and a lot of warmth, and they grow really well in those conditions. So that's the Rhynchostylis gigantea. If you want a kind of succulent looking leaf shape like the Rhynchostylis gigantea with a little bit of the striping, but want a more compact orchid, the hybrid of Rhynchostylis gigantea with Holcoglossum flavescens, also known as Holcostylus MS Sunlight, is a beautiful compact growing alternative that also inherits a very narrow leaf form from the Holcoglossum, but has these beautiful succulent leaves. So I also would recommend that to look into if you find that Rhynchostylis giganteas themselves are too big, take up too much space, and are too much of a kind of space commitment for you. Then I definitely think that the little Holcostylus MS Sunlight or any other Rhynchostylis gigantea hybrids with smaller, more compact orchids could be something that you may be interested in looking into for a beautiful foliage shape and structure on an orchid. Here's one for any of you guys who like a more grassy frond-like foliage like grasses or palms. This is a Maxillaria tenuifolia, and it has a very interesting growth habit where the pseudobulbs climb upon each other and then send roots down the inside of the stem. So you never see lots and lots of aerial roots, or very rarely if they break the bracts along the stem, but you get this wonderful climbing effect. Very tall orchids with this beautiful kind of full grassy foliage from that growth habit. So if you're into more grassy looking plants, the Maxillaria tenuifolia could be for you. Bonus, when it flowers after a drier rest period, it has wonderful huge bloom displays that arise from along the stem and have a beautiful red flower that smells intensely of Malibu rum coconut fragrance that is beautiful, and this is what gives it its alternate name of the coconut orchid. So I definitely recommend this one for foliage but also flowers if you're into fragrant flowers. but it's just a beautiful plant on its own, so I think it's gorgeous. You do need to have a little bit of room for it though. It does get quite large, but beautiful. And I love to have like this sort of plant dotted around in amongst my other orchids for a bit of variation. I actually have 3 of these. You can propagate them quite easily by division if you take the divisions at the correct time of year, which I believe is spring, and have at least sort of 3 or 4 bulbs to play around with. But they have to have the roots kind of near the bottom of the stems for the division to be successful, I think. Otherwise you've got quite a long waiting game with them. So that is the Maxillaria tenuifolia. Another one for anyone who likes kind of more frondy foliage are Paphiopedilums. This time, this is the American hybrid variation. It has a very, very large foliage and very rapidly grows into an impressive clustering display, and it does, or at least my one, has a very slight mottling pattern to the leaves that is very interesting. It does add interest, but for me, I love this plant just for the like bulk and the beautiful light green, kind of lime green foliage with a little bit of mottling running through, and the dark purple speckling that appears at the base of the plant as the plants are developing and growing. I find them to be very beautiful. I don't enjoy the flowers so much. I do keep this one purely for the beautiful kind of glossy display of foliage. I just think is absolutely gorgeous. So that's a Paphiopedilum American hybrid. Next, I'm going to show you a group of more succulent type orchids, and this includes the Angraecum leonis, Dendrobium anceps, Dendrobium leonis, and Atulumnia. Starting off with the Angraecum leonis, this is a must-have for any kind of succulent-leaved orchid lovers out there. If you like the Rhynchostylus gigantea, you'll probably like this orchid. Absolutely gorgeous palm leaf type appearance. It kind of reminds me of a little palm tree. There are a couple of different varieties of this. I'm not sure which one this is, but I also have a narrower form leaf shape, and I kind of find it difficult to get clear distinctions between the two. So I'm not going to go into that in this video, but worth double checking whether you have the ones from the Comoros Islands or the one from Madagascar. They do have different leaf forms, and one is more compact than the other. Unfortunately, I think the issue has been slightly muddied by the fact that potentially in cultivation the two may have been crossed at some point. It's very difficult to ascertain exactly, but there are 2 distinct leaf forms, and many nurseries will not specify either way. Some will though, so worth double checking if you wanted like the larger variety or the smaller variety. It's worth looking into a little bit more. That's the beautiful Angraecum leonis. Now, moving from one leonis to the other. This is the Dendrobium leonis, and I've shown the Angraecum behind it for scale. This is a much more compact, small growing orchid that produces little flowers from between the succulent leaves. Well, this one was purchased as a larger plant, but it was fairly badly off in the root department. It had roots, but they weren't fantastic, and they did die off soon after repotting. It was mounted to start with, so potted it up and they did die, but it produced a massive cluster of new growths from the old section of the plant. So it's very vigorous, and it's doing very well in semi-hydro in a mix of Ceramis and Leca, and I just find it to be absolutely adorable. These themselves can grow quite long, so you'll end up with kind of trailing displays of these little chubby succulent growths, I guess. They can also produce keikis, so you can end up with quite a bushy display. So that's a miniature kind of chubby succulent type of orchid if you're interested in very compact succulent type orchids. While I'm not saying that the Dendrobium leonis won't achieve this size, the Dendrobium anceps is a much faster growing orchid, but I did get it as a larger specimen if you also like the same kind of look. Mine itself is producing lots of little keikis as well, so it rapidly becomes a very bushy trailing plant. It's doing extremely well in semi-hydro in a mix of Ceramis and Leca. Again, it has very fine roots, and it has a much larger scale to the leaves than the Leonis. Show you a comparison for scale. So this one acts more like a kind of trailing hanging plant. It has beautiful glossy leaves, and this is it compared to the Dendrobium Leonis. You can see that a small new growth on this is much larger than the whole of the plant that I have on the Dendrobium Leonis. So the anseps is a larger growing plant, has beautiful foliage, not quite as chubby as the Leonis, much flatter, but very beautiful. They grow up until they kind of weigh enough to tip themselves over. And that's the full plant for scale. So that is the Dendrobium anceps. A look at succulent type orchids wouldn't be complete without including Tolumnias. This is the Tolumnia pink brished. It has wonderful mottling on the foliage. I'm not sure if you can see, but then it's been exposed to highlight. It's developed an anthocyanin mottling. These also have gorgeous little flower displays that are very oncidium-like, but beautiful succulent foliage that kind of shows their twig epiphyte origins. These are twig epiphytes from Jamaica. They like a lot of oxygen, a lot of air around the root zone. This can be achieved by mounting very often. They also can do very well potted as long as a rapid drying cycle or lots and lots of air movement, airflow is provided. To get you a little bit of a closer look at the beautiful leaf speckling that this particular one has. So these are gorgeous little succulents that produce wonderful flowers, not fragrant, but I think they're absolutely gorgeous, and I think everyone should have a Tolumnia or 10 in their collection. And that is a look at some of my favourite foliage orchids that are not jewel orchids. So there's such a wide variety of orchid out there. Orchids are one of the largest, if not the largest in the world, genus of flowering tropical plants. And there's such huge variety, not just in the flowers, but in the shapes, the growth patterns, the foliage, the coloration of the foliage. So I think that's why we tend to fall down this rabbit hole as orchid growers, because there's such diversity within the orchid genus. There's so much more out there in terms of foliage and not only flowering plants. And I hope that you've seen something in here today and that makes you think maybe you would like to add that to your collection, because I just think that there's so many options out there for foliage orchids, not just foliage houseplants, and at least with a foliage orchid you also get a wonderful bloom display as well, and I just think they're beautiful. I am getting more into houseplants, obviously they're faster growing, but as orchid collectors I think that we should open our eyes a little bit to what is out there in terms of orchids variety. So I hope that you found this video of my favourite foliage orchids useful and interesting, not too long. Thank you so much for watching today, and if you did enjoy this video or have any other video suggestions for me, give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment down below with any suggestions, and I will do my best to answer any questions or queries or respond to suggestions with videos. And thank you again so much for watching today. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more regular orchid updates. It does help me out, and I'll see you guys all later. Have a great day. Bye!